Texas's primary election has set the stage for the midterms in November. As expected, Republican Governor Greg Abbott will face off against Democratic nominee, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke. But at least 7 races for House seats will head to runoff elections in May. Both the Democratic and Republican candidates for Attorney General will also go to runoffs. I want to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Jack Fink. Caitlin is a CBS News political reporter, and Jack is a reporter for our Dallas-Fort Worth station, KTVT. Thank you guys for joining us today. So, Jack, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton and George P. Bush are heading to a runoff. What's in store for their next big matchup?
Well, Weijia, nice to see you again. I think the last time we saw each other was in Texas, in Houston. This is going to be an all-out brawl. We saw that in the first round of the campaign, and we are going to see this again in the runoff. I expect lots of money, lots of TV ads, lots of firepower on the airwaves. You know, last night the incumbent Ken Paxton told his supporters that he framed this up as a debate between a moderate Democrat, George P. Bush, and the conservative himself. He reminded people that he has the support of former President Donald Trump. Today, when I spoke to Bush, he told me that this is really not about that this is really more about Paxton's ethics and his legal troubles, and he's appealing to conservatives and everybody in the Republican Party to vote for him. Bush told me he's reaching out to Eva Guzman and Congressman Louis Gohmert for their support. I reached out to Gohmert's campaign. They said that's not going to happen.
Well, there's so many hot races now in Texas. In the 28th Congressional District, Representative Henry Cuellar narrowly beat challenger Jessica Cisneros, and that race also heads to a runoff. Can you tell us about the importance of that particular challenge, Jack?
Well, this is a South Texas congressional race, and what I think is significant about this is Henry Cuellar is a very popular incumbent, well-known down there. He's a moderate Democrat, probably the most conservative of Democrats, not only in Texas, but maybe in the entire nation. And so he's being challenged now. He'll have to go into a runoff with Jessica Cisneros, who's received a lot of support from the progressives in the Democratic Party, from Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And so that's going to be a very interesting dynamic. And then from there, because this is a moderately Democratic district, what's that going to look like in a general election in a year where Republicans are expecting to have a wave election?
And as you correctly predicted yesterday, Governor Greg Abbott and former Congressman Beto O'Rourke won their primaries. What are Beto's chances at unseating the Republican governor in this state that is typically so deeply red?
Well, Weijia, that was actually a pretty easy prediction on my part. Everybody was predicting that. Appreciate the props, though. But, I mean, seriously, I think this is still going to be an uphill climb for Beto O'Rourke. Simply because 2018, when he first ran for U.S. Senate and came very close to knocking off Senator Cruz, is a very different year than 2022 is shaping up to be. And so you have that, plus the fact that Governor Greg Abbott is a very big campaigner. He raises a lot of money. He's got nearly $50 million in the bank. Governor Abbott's campaign said today that they are going to continuously and not let up on Beto O'Rourke's record, his past statements when he ran for president, which proved unpopular here in Texas with regards to guns, with regards to nonprofit status for churches. So they are going to be constantly reminding voters here. And the other issue, too, the other uphill challenge for O'Rourke is that President Biden is unpopular in Texas, not only with Republicans, of course, but with independents as well. So it's going to be a challenge, but the campaign for Governor Abbott does expect O'Rourke to raise a lot of money. And O'Rourke is a good campaigner himself. He draws a crowd. He knows how to do that.
And, Jack, you also mentioned the influence of former President Donald Trump. I think the big question is how much political power Trump still has, which is something that continues to evolve. But how did it play out last night?
Well, I think you saw that at least up in the North Texas area where we are. It played out even as far down as the Tarrant County judge race, which is basically the head of our commissioner's court here in Tarrant County, which is the county surrounding Fort Worth. And what happened was Tim O'Hare, who is backed by former President Trump, won outright and beat a former Fort Worth mayor, very popular Betsy Price, who had all the name recognition. And O'Hare ran his campaign because Tarrant County is the largest Republican county, not only in the state of Texas, but in the entire nation. And his mission, O'Hare's mission, was to keep, and it still is to keep Tarrant County Republican. And so the fact that he had the support from the former president and Senator Cruz as well certainly worked out very well with him, and that resonated with primary voters last night.
And we just learned that Republican Congressman Van Taylor is ending his reelection campaign after admitting to having an affair. Do you have any details about that, and tell us how it could impact the midterms?
Well, this just came out a short time ago, and we have confirmed that Congressman Van Taylor, who's from Collin County, which is just north of Dallas, is suspending his reelection campaign. He admitted in a letter to his supporters that he did have an affair last year. He says he has apologized to his wife and their 3 daughters. He says he has called Keith Self, who is the other candidate in the runoff race, because it did go up into it did end up in a runoff last night, and has told Self that he is now not going to be campaigning. He has until March 16th to take his name off the ballot, which I expect him to do. And so now Keith Self is going to emerge. He's very conservative, and this district has become more Republican than it was because it was redrawn in redistricting.
And Caitlin, here in Washington, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell threw some shade at fellow Republican Senator Rick Scott's Rescue America plan that argued every American should pay income tax. How significant of a fault line is this?
Yeah, it was a really significant moment yesterday. So just a little bit of background. Rick Scott runs the Senate's campaign arm for the Republicans. So he's in charge of helping Republicans gain back power in the U.S. Senate. And he released an 11-point plan. Among the many things in that plan, he said that everybody in the United States should pay taxes. And Democrats really ran away with that, saying that, you know, Republicans want to raise taxes because there is a portion of lower income Americans who don't pay an income tax. And so Republicans were feeling like that had just opened up attacks from Democrats at a time where they really didn't want to have those kinds of attacks. So Republicans were raising a lot of concern about what Scott was proposing. And so you saw McConnell yesterday be very clear, dismissing that component of the plan, saying that, look, if and when Republicans take over the Senate, I will be majority leader and I will set the agenda, and raising taxes is not part of the agenda. So why is that all significant here? Yes, it's Republican infighting, but it comes at a time where Republicans are seeing lots of opportunities to gain seats, not only in the House, but also in the U.S. Senate. And they feel like they have a very coherent message heading into the midterms. I talked to Senator John Cornyn, who's a member of Republican leadership today. He said that, look, we've got a crystallized message. It's focused on crime, education, inflation, and we don't need any sort of distractions or confusion from that message. So McConnell was pretty much laying down, putting his foot down and trying to keep his members focused on a clear message heading into the midterms. We'll see if that resonates.
Well, it is all about the message, always. And today, Caitlin, President Biden hit the road to talk about infrastructure in Wisconsin. Remind us of how critical that state is and whether Democrats expect the president to hit the campaign trail on their behalf as we get closer to November. I mean, he has said himself that he is itching to travel more.
Exactly, Weija. You know that this is a president who likes to be out on the road. I've talked to a lot of Democratic lawmakers up here on Capitol Hill who said that they would like the president to get out of Washington and on the road more because they feel like the message from Democrats has been kind of drawn into partisan and intra-party fights about what they have not been able to accomplish. You know, the Build Back Better bill did not progress here on Capitol Hill. Democrats feel like their agenda items have been stuck, so they want to talk less about what they haven't been able to do and more about what they want to do. So we've been asking around all of the competitive Democratic campaigns, we've been asking candidates, do you want President Biden to come to your state or district and campaign for you? And what we've been hearing is that nobody really wants to turn down a visit from the president. He can provide a big stage and microphone, but they do, if he does come to visit, they do want him to be very specific. They want him to talk about either infrastructure or a specific policy proposal that helps the Democrats make their case. What they are dealing with, however, is that this is a president who has very low approval ratings. Our CBS News poll just came out this week showing his approval stuck in the 40s. He is losing. He is doing poorly among independent voters. About 37%, just about 37% approve of the job he's doing. And so they're worried about those numbers and what it means for Democrats. So they want to localize their races, get away from the national mood. That's kind of hard to do in an environment like this, but that's the message that they want. So they're welcoming these visits, but again, hoping that they're very targeted and specific on policy.
All right, I know you will be watching it all. Jack Fink and Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks so much for coming on. Hope to see you soon.